Hi everyone, so this is day 4 lecture for the gender inequality. So as we did about the racial or ethnic inequalities, we can face the gender inequality as a woman or as a man. So even though there are some dominant forms for the gender inequality in the US, so we can see how those gender inequality has some various backgrounds or theoretical explanations by the sociologists. So there are still many states has like a bigger gender gap. So the worst on gender inequality shows in the southern area. So the worst part is the woman in the Louisiana, so makes about just more than half of the earnings of the male. So even though they have some same the education and same the qualification, women are less likely to earn the similar amount of money compared with the men. So in the DC area, so where is it like around our area, has the highest proportion of the earnings compared with the men, but still it's just about 90% of the men in the same area or the same occupation. So even though the United States has the very moderate level of the gender gap in the gender pay gap, but still we can see the bigger differentiations in the pay gap area. So even though we are in the living in the area has the smaller pay gap, we need to speculate why this type of the differences exist in our life in the USA. So first, we need to define sex and gender. So it's kind of very common knowledge that sex is the biological term and the gender is more social term. So sex is kind of the primary and secondary characteristic by genitalia or some developed during the poetry. So there are some biological and anatomical differences between females and males. So it is determined from their birth and during their adolescence period. In contrast, the gender is like a social term as how society expects on us as the female or males. So we are expected to behave as a woman or as a man by the cultural norms or social norms. So we develop our gender identity from the childhood, even from the infant period. And we form the beliefs about ourselves as the female or males. So even in the infant period, so when they are crying, females are more likely to receive the gentle treatments like a smaller sound of the voice of treating them, but boys are more likely to be treated in the more masculine ways, like just saying stop or just saying the short word in the directing words. So there are some types of the gender expectations as the males or females as the forms of the femininity as the girls and women and masculinity for the boys and men. So there are some social construction part of the gender. So femininity is like being a feminine is the type of the woman are expected to be very gentle and sensitive and nurturing and delicate and these types of the characteristics. So these type of the expectations are provided from the birth of our lives. If they behave as more feminine, sometimes they can have more rewards or benefits in their family or in their school or in the workplaces. Not likely in these days in the workplaces, but still there are the gendered lines, but being a feminine for the woman. So for the males, the masculinity are expected to the men to be strong or brave and very independent and achieving a lot. So these types of the femininity or masculinity are very hard to be denied to exist in this United States, and as though the stereotypes. And there are some differences due to biological differences and the cultural expectations. So, the biological term and sex determines that differences stem from more biological traits than social expectations. So, in biological terms or perspectives, the differences are very inevitable because these are biological differences. However, the sociological or social sciences expect that those differences are not inevitable, but it can be changed by the education or socialization process. And there are some beliefs that women are more or better fitted to the care works than men because women are more uh, women are kinder and more have some more empathy than men. But we don't know these are true by the biological matters or sociological or cultural matters. So biology says that those differences are inevitable because these are stems from the biological traits. However, social and the cultural matters say that differences are just learned from the society through the socialization or the cultural expectations by the media or the education. So, biological explanations said that biology is the destiny. So they say that gender differences are the destiny. So from the prehistoric periods, when they need to hunt, they needed to have some more physical power. So men are in the evaluations or evolutions, men develop more physical power because they have more suited power in the hunting than women. However, women needed to develop for the childbearing and the nursing for the children or the other family members. So, evolutionary psychologists argue that there were some natural selection processes favored for the current natures of the man and woman. So, men developed for the physical power, and women developed for more kinder or gentler nurturing powers or nurturing skills. So they believe that males have higher level of testosterone as the hormones increase aggression. So currently existing gender differences are inevitable and should be maintained because they are rooted in the biology and these are not be changed and this is because these are very natural. There are many critiques for the biological explanations, such as there are very great gender variations in the behaviors and attitude within gender. So even though we are the same females or males, we can have some differentiations of the behaviors in terms of the level of aggression or level of femininity or a level of masculinity. So in modern societies, actually, we don't need to have very aggressive hunting power to survive for survival. So it's kind of the justifying strategy to maintain kind of gender inequality. So in the patriarchy society, we need to, or I don't say, the dominant gender as a male need to maintain current and traditional gender roles to maintain current hierarchy. So it's kind of justifying the biological differences. And the differences in childhood are even rooted from the socialization. So as I mentioned in the crying babies, in the from the infant period, we have the socialization in the gendered ways. And the socialization from the family and the peer group and the friends reinforces the gender norms or gender expectations in our society. So even though there are some biological differences between females and males, there are cultural and social differences rooted in the societies. So there are like gender roles differ from the various cultures. So this is the cultural explanations. So in the many pre-industrial societies and the cultures, there are so many variations of the manly and womanly works throughout the cultures. So um, in some societies, like the manly activities are done by the woman, or some societies like a many a woman, like a feminine works, like such as housework or caring works, were done by the males. And there are some cultures have some additional gender categories. So today we just cover like a gender as the male and female, because I will cover more about the sexual orientations or homosexuality or heterosexuality in the next chapter. But there are like four genders, like a male or female, or additionally male like a female, female like a male. So it's kind of like counting the words, but there are some additional gender categories in some cultures. So masculine woman in the Amazons could be also an example of the cultural impact of the gender. So therefore, gender impact on the definition of gender roles exists in many cultures. So there are also structural or socialization problem in the gender inequality, because socialization refers to the process whereby the individuals run their roles expected by the society from the many institutions such as family, peers, and other institutions. So there are various institutions such as family. So usually parents do the socialization works from the infant period. So gender role can be run from the family, from the parents, like crying babies. They need to have some different strategies to soften or the calming the crying babies. And there are some peer groups. So in school age, they play in sports or games, but boys tend to play more sports, more active or aggressive sports than females. And in the schools, there are many gender-linked activities, and stereotypes are learned from the teachers, even though in the subtle ways. So the teachers praise the boys in their achievement compared with the woman, and women are less likely to be penalized from the aggressive behaviors than males. So there are many learned stereotypes in the schools as well. The mass media also generates the gender norm by the socialization process, such as the TV programs filled with the gender stereotypes. So many main characters of the TV programs are males than females, such as Star Wars. In these days, there are many trends of the gender neutral or more females in the movies, but still there are some like dominance of the males in the important roles, like more aggressive or more independent or achieving characters. So there are reinforced gender images by the mass media. And religion, so especially for the Christianity or some Islam, most of the characters in the Bible are the males, and they reinforce some like images of the gender, such as some Bible term says that a woman should obey to their husband or the male leaderships in the church. So these types of the socialization reinforces of the current gender or traditional gender roles. So gender is shaped by the society and by the culture, above the biological features of the males and females. So sex is a more biological concept, and gender is more a social and cultural concept. And sociologists usually think that culture and socialization matters in the gender divisions, and various social agents work on the development and mass on the division of the gender roles and identity. So there are various formats of the gender inequalities. So feminism and sexism are some types of the gender inequality and the movement towards gender equality. So sexism is similar with biology. So this is the traditional gender role and stereotype, such as prejudice and discrimination because they think that women are less competitive and less achieving because they lack of the certain qualities than males. So this is very similar with the content what we learned yesterday. So they don't have some like a qualification process and they further investigation, but they just keep their beliefs about the gender. I mean, the females are believed less competitive because they are women, just because they are women. So the feminism is the opposite way of the sexism because they argue that women and men are very same in their qualification and capacities and their abilities. So they should have the equal opportunities in their jobs and in their other economic positions and their social life. So a woman and men can be different in other ways, because there are some like biological differences and the physical differences. However, there are no inherent differences in the qualification and performances in the better ways. So there are like a declining sexism and increasing the feminism. So this is the like data shown in the textbook based on the gender social survey. So there are like a declining sexism as the traditional gender roles in the families is declining a lot. And in contrast, there are some like a favoring the woman candidates for the president if they are qualified. So there are like a higher tendency of the gender equality in these days. So there are various dimensions of the gender inequality. So the first term is the income inequalities as the gender pay gap. There are persistent gender gap in the income of the US. So even though women's labor force participation increased dramatically, there are still lower rate than men compared with the counterparts. So if you compare the statistics is increased a lot, but still just more than half of the women participate in labor force compared with about 80% of the men. So if we compare the median income or median earnings of the full-time workers over the actively working age period, you can see the men are more likely to earn than women in all of the education degree the levels. So there are like about 80% to 74% of the gender pay gap compared with the women and men. So it means that women earn only 80% of the income of the men's earnings. So interestingly, if they have the higher education, their pay gap increases a lot. So there are differentiations of the benefits of the rewards of the education between men and women. So there are several backgrounds of the income inequalities, but the dominant feature is the sex segregation, which means there are like a different proportions of the genders in some workplaces. So women are more likely to work in the low-paying jobs such as service area or the political area. So there is like a term as the pink-collar jobs, such as the clerks or service places, because these jobs are filled with more women than males. So usually these jobs are low-paying jobs because these jobs require food skills and academic credentials. So there are also socialization and the gender discrimination account for the sex segregation because some jobs are traditionally expected to fill with the men than women, such as the like physicians or other like physical work jobs, compared with the pink collar jobs such as service like nursing jobs and other care work jobs. So this is the table displaying the gender segregation in the job places. So you can see the caring jobs such as the teacher jobs and the like language pathologists and secretaries and the registered nurses. These jobs are filled with female workers dominantly. However, more highly paying jobs such as pharmacists, oh no, pharmacists are very similar. The physicians and lawyers, dentists, doctors, and CS engineers and electricians have the higher proportion of the males. So you can see very highly segregated patterns in the workplaces. So even though a woman has the equal qualifications, like compatible words, including all the values such as importance of the position, degree, or skills needed, a woman still earns less than men, even though they have the equal compatible words. So women's higher burden or caregiving responsibilities or the housework may reduce their available time of the work compared with the men. So gender gap increases by age. So when they are in the earlier career period, they have very smaller gap in here. But as they grows up, I mean as they ages, there are like a bigger gaps because women need to carry their babies and they need to bear children and they raise children and they usually need to leave the workforce and then there are many obstacles when they need to return their jobs. So there are like a bigger gaps in the later part of the life course of the woman. So there are some terms like the glass ceiling. I think you are familiar with this word. That there are some like invisible barriers that women can reach, but they cannot go beyond. Compared with the glass ceiling, men are expected to have the glass escalator. So even though they work in the female-dominant workplace, such as the schools or like nursing jobs, they can be the head of the position, such as the principals of the schools. So there are more numbers, so like much more numbers of the much larger numbers of the male principals, such as elementary schools or middle schools, than the female principals, even though more than 90% of the teachers are women. So low-income female-headed families than male-headed families are like consist of the or accounts for the gender inequality in the income. So more in worst ways, a woman of color face like triple difficulties by the gender, race, and social class. So if we compare the men and women, the whites, they are like about $10,000 difference. However, if you compare the African Americans and Latinas, they earn about only 70% or 60% compared with the white woman. So when white woman earns about 80% of the earnings of the white males, blacks and Latina has only 70% of the 60% of the earnings of the white males. So they have like a triple burden as the being a female and being a minority race and being like a lower social class. And there are also household inequalities such as the houseworks or care works. Women are more likely to do more housework than men, about 2 to 3 times. So they do housework such as cleaning and care work than men. So even though males do some housework, they are more likely to do some work requires physical power and requires a lower amount of time. So both paid and unpaid works. So in the workplace and at home, there are gender inequalities. So even though there are some narrowing gaps in these days between women and men, women still suffer from some inequalities in terms of their time or in terms of the energy in the household labor than men. So feminism refers and believes that women and men should be equal in the opportunities in the social life. And US has a wider gender gap in the wages by the gender segregation of workplaces, by discrimination and socialization. And women of color have like a triple burden based on their gender, race, and the social class. So there are some format of the inequality stems from the violence against the woman. So there are some highly dominant shapes of the rape and sexual assault done to the woman. So even though male can be the victim of the sexual assault or rape, a woman has the higher likelihood of the being a victims of the rape or sexual assault. So these crimes shape a great part, a large part of their social life and the inequality. And women are more likely to be raped by someone they knows than by the stranger about the truth for time, which increases their fearness of the being a victim of those criminals. So there are many myths of the justifying or legitimizing the rape or sexual assaults. So there are the rape myths that women somehow, I know it's like sound weird, but they enjoy being raped or women being raped and they're asking for it and even they enjoy that. So sometimes they blame or society blame the victims of the rape because of their dress code. If they have like a shorter dress or being like showing like sexually more active or the behaviors, they sometimes criticize or being not very feminine. So this kind of cultural belief that increases the likelihood of rape and sexual assaults. And in contrast with the woman, men are admired if they have a lot of the sexual partners or sexual partners or as the woman. So they are believed as very strong or very active when they have the sexual partner, many sexual partners. So there are many possible structural explanations that on the power differences as the position, such as the higher position of men have some like sexual harassment because of the conditions of the promotions or other the job employment like that. So there is also a type of the sexual harassment. So these are like unwelcome the sexual context or advances, because of the chances of the employment and promotion and other benefits. So even though males can be the victims of the sexual harassment, women are more likely to be the victims of sexual harassment. So in mass media, women are like a pictured as depicted as the sexual object to give the pleasure for the males in the advertisement or other like dramas or some like movies. There are some like objectifications as the of the woman who are like sexually objects of the for the males. So men's position of power are also some condition of the sexual harassment. So as we mentioned in the statistics or the prior historical patterns, men are more likely to earn more money and men are more likely to be promoted in the job places. So men can have some the power to enforce the sexual harassment conditions or places. So we need to work more on the gender equality because just dividing the males and females because of the biological features is not a good way to fulfill all the potential. So if they are just discriminated because of their gender, it's like fulfilling their whole potential. So to fulfill whole potential of the society, we need to pursue the gender equality. So there are some like benefits of being a man and disadvantages of being a male. So like the white privileges, males tend to have some advantages of being a man. So males don't need to care about or fear about the walking on the street compared with females. Even though men can be the victim of the rape or the sexual assault, the likelihood is much smaller or lower than females. And men may not be afraid of their gender as the obstacles of applying some jobs or promotions compared with the woman. And there are many other benefits like in the promotions and education and other images as the males. However, there are also increasing patterns of the process of the being a male. So because of the social expectations of being very strong and being very competitive, males are more likely to suffer from emotional or mental illnesses because they are not expected to express their emotions in true ways. And it is very hard to find the mental health services or other professional helps because of their expectations of being strong and going there to ask for help could be seen as very feminine or very weak. So there are like a higher chances of victimizations of all the crimes such as homicide or suicide, homicide or other violences. So there are many efforts to reducing the gender inequalities. So even though there are like a lower level of the gender inequality in these days, we need to have some like a cultural or structural efforts to reduce the gender inequality because there are still many factors maintain the current level of the gender inequalities. So there we need to have some policies and structural and cultural factors to help the reducing the gender inequality. So women's movement is a part of the effort to reduce the gender inequalities. So we need to remind, they need to remind, I mean, some like a women's movement or some actions for the gender inequalities remind us of the current sexism and the traditional gender exists in the US. So men would have some like advantages and disadvantages of being a male, but still men tend to have some great advantages than females. And various formats of the effort should be continued to reduce the level of gender inequality. So as we always do, please keep in mind that you need to keep the due date. And I found many unsolved assignments, and be sure to submit on your assignments on time because every daily assignment, including the quizzes and the writing assignments, consists of the 5% of the whole your grade. So make sure to submit your assignments on time. Okay, thank you and see you tomorrow.